we'll try and make our way through for the next hour on Around the World in 80 Gardens. So by introduction, I am Richard Benfield. I'm now a retired professor emeritus at Central Connecticut State University, where I worked for 25 years. Before that, I was with the Canadian National Park Service and the University of Oklahoma. But really have been researching gardens around the world for the last 25 or so years. It started in 1997 when my university required me to have a research agenda. I went to a place called Longwood Gardens, which I suspect many of you would have been to, and was sitting on the wall watching all of these large numbers of people being disgorged into the garden, and thought, gosh, I have to teach a class on tourism. Coming up in 3 weeks, I better get all the data. And so I phoned a lady called Nancy Moran at the APGA, the American Public Garden Association, and said, can I have all your data on visitors to gardens? She said, yes, that will not take me very long at all. I said, oh, I'm delighted. I'm so glad. She said, yeah, we don't have any, so it won't take me very long at all. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. No, I said, there's large numbers of people going to your garden. She said, oh, yes, we know, but we've never assembled those data, collected those data. I said, well, can I do it? And she said, absolutely, we would love it if you would. And so, as I say, since 1997, I've been collecting data on visitors to botanic gardens to the extent that now I am the world authority on tourism to botanic gardens. Though I told my daughter just before we started this evening, I was doing this presentation tonight, and she said, I suppose you're going to tell them you're the world authority on gardens, aren't you, Dad? And I said, yes, I am. And she said, well, make sure you tell them you're the only one, so you could also be the worst. So at the end of the year, hopefully, or the end of the evening, hopefully you'll decide whether I'm the best or the worst. But as I say, I was collecting those data for quite a number of years until someone with loose lips, who shall remain nameless because it was me, said someone should write a book on it. So in 2013, I wrote this book. I should have put it on the PowerPoint here. It says Garden Tourism, which I wrote in 2013. I was actually a little bit embarrassed by the title. I tried to find something a little more sexy, a little more compelling than garden tourism, but couldn't think of anything. I'm not very creative, obviously. And then realized not long afterwards that it comes up first on Google. So that helps. I don't really mind it now so much and all that. So that brings us to last year, when the publisher of Garden Tourism, you can see in the bottom right of your screen a logo that says CABI, College Agricultural Botanical and Botanical International is the acronym. A publisher in Wallingford, England said, would I write a second edition of the book? I said, absolutely not. And they said, why not? And I said, because I don't want to repeat exactly what I said 7 years ago and just give more data. And they said, oh, no, we didn't want to do that. We thought that wouldn't sell either. So we've noticed you teach a course at university called New Directions in Tourism. Why don't you write a book called New Directions in Garden Tourism? So I said, yes, I would. So you are amongst the very privileged here on the right of your screen to see what the cover will look like when it comes out at the end of the year. And prior to that, I thought, boy, why don't I just kind of gather up all the stuff I've collected over the last 7 years of New Directions in Garden Tourism. And that's involved travel to many countries, probably around 80 countries in 80 gardens. So I thought I'll just put together some of the pictures I've collected over the last 8 years in terms of what's happening in garden tourism, which is really quite exciting. It's very different, very innovative, very, very unique and very beautiful, and give you the results of that. So that's what we're going to be doing this evening. We're going to go around the world in 80 gardens. Essentially, you're going to get a preview of New Directions in Garden Tourism. So with that, before I get started, I have to do one very important public service announcement based on the situation we find ourselves in, and that's to make sure you know that gardening has not been cancelled. So that's why we do it at 7 o'clock tonight. So tomorrow you can go out and do your gardening all through the day and not give a hoot about coronavirus. So we won't give a hoot about coronavirus, though I do obey the dictation or the dictums that come down from our leaders. I think it's important we do that. So as you can see, while gardening's off to a great start, I planted myself in front of the TV 4 weeks ago. I've already grown noticeably already. So there's the proof of if you follow what's going on. The other one I wanted to show you before we get started, particularly on gardens, was this picture here. It is a giant sequoia. It comes from California, of course. And it was part of a project I was involved in over the last 7 years when I was the National Geographic Alliance for Connecticut executive director, and I was involved in putting this picture together. It is, as I say, a giant sequoia. And if you look very closely, right at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a little red dot. And if you look in the very top of the tree, or almost to the top, there's another little red dot, and those are the humans. And so what you are seeing there is the first ever picture of a full giant sequoia. It's taken with 6 wide-angle lenses, spliced together the images, and then put together to be presented as part of National Geographic's photography of, in this case, the first picture of a 378-foot, I think, is that sequoia tree. So I thought you might like to see that as part of what I've been doing as new directions. But today we're going to do 80 gardens, going around the world in 80 gardens, and the story starts up in the top left-hand corner, which is the reading room of the building on the bottom right, which is the Reform Club of 1832 on Pall Mall in London. And it was the place where in 1872, Jules Verne, the gentleman with the beard, set the start of his novel, Around the World in 80 Days, The Journeys of one Phileas Fogg. And Around the World in 80 Days has now become very much a catchphrase for lots of things. And it's featured in terms of geographical travel. There's a number of things on the right. Michael Palin of Monty Python fame went around the world in 80 days, tracing the path for the BBC, as you can see. Underneath Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days is Jimmy Stewart in 1956. He did Around the World in 80 Days. But the one which I like probably more than anything is the one up in the top left, Jackie Chan's Around the World in 80 Days, I think 1986, not because of its merit as a movie, but because it was voted the movie in which Arnold Schwarzenegger is at his worst as an actor. So if you want some levity over the weekend, go and get that one out and you'll see Arnold Schwarzenegger at his worst. Phileas Fogg was the person who went around the world in 80 days, but he took with him his valet. Having dismissed his former valet, James Forster, for bringing him shaving water 2 degrees too cool, he hires a Frenchman, Jean Passepartout, as his replacement. There he is there on the right. And I have to confess that when I go around the world in 80 days, I have a valet, but my valet does not or did not bring me shaving water. Or in the case of Jean Passepartout, in Around the World in 8 Days, would go and see the gardens in place of Phileas Fogg. My valet actually was completely useless, was just absolutely of no value to me at all. He's actually totally disinterested in what we did, certainly disinterested in my career, and certainly generally disinterested in life. There he is, that's my son David, and he travels with me around the world. And as you can see, like most boys of 17, 18 years of age, they won't take their hands out of their pockets. They're certainly not interested in what I'm doing. And he was my valet for the years that I was doing this travel. We have Around the World in 80 Days, which is what we're going to base it on, but there are Around the World in 80 Tales, Around the World in 80 Bucks. I suspect that's a 1960s book. I don't think you can get around, well, maybe you can get Around the World in $80 these days. You can do Around the World in 80 Dinners, eating your way around the world. Trees have been taken, purees have been taken, and 80 treasures have been taken. So I've got 80 gardens, though there's also Around the World in 80 Lays, and I'm not too sure what that is. It's probably some Hawaiian reference, which brings us to Hawaii, because we're going to go back across the Pacific and do Phileas Fogg's journey in reverse. So we'll start in Hawaii, in large part because 5 months ago, this was where I was finishing off the book, New Directions in Garden Tourism. It's the North Shore of Hawaii. And you can see the point at the far western end of the island of Oahu, and the beach right outside the house where I was working. This is Waimea Bay, which was going a little further east, a rather beautiful bay. As you can see the blue water, but it's much more famous as a location for the Bonsai Pipeline. That's the North Shore of Hawaii. That's what I could see out of my window. I quickly add neither of those two people are me on the surfboard. I think you need serious psychiatric help if you're going to do that. But it's certainly a nice place to do garden research. But let's talk gardens. This is the Waimea Valley. It's a 15-mile long valley that goes into the heart of Oahu, and it's been reserved as a botanical garden in its natural state. So you can see the floral splendor that it has. I kind of enjoyed it because I went there, and the executive director gave me a bunch of data and asked me where I was from. I told him I was from a place called New Britain, Connecticut, halfway between Boston and Darien, I suppose I could have said to him. And let me just explain where the university is. He said, no, that's all right. He said, I come from South Windsor, Connecticut, so I know exactly where you're from. So South Windsor boy makes good in the garden world. Oahu has 5 botanic gardens. This is the garden right downtown Honolulu, the Foster Botanical Garden. It's the oldest, has some rather large trees. It has some of the most pristine native vegetation in Hawaii. But my reason for going, which was part of what you'll see in chapter 6, was this place here, Maluhia Botanical Garden up on the north shore of Hawaii near a place called Kailua. And it was a small garden, is a small garden. It was set aside in 1992 because they built a water supply reservoir outside Kailua, and the land around, in order to protect it, they left it for a botanic garden. And it was getting about 30 to 50,000 visitors a year, not very many, until in 2017 they made it one of the 5 best places for Instagram selfies in Oahu, Hawaii. And if you don't know what a selfie is, which I suspect most of you do, but I don't think you've seen a selfie as good as this one. That's my favorite selfie of all time. This is the selfies, the place they go. And as you can see on the left, the large volcanic cliffs and gullies that ring the Botanic Garden, this is the entrance to the Botanic Garden, is somewhat, I think, spectacular. Hence the sign to the right. You can see the signs running down the right-hand side of the road. No cameras, no mobile phones, no photographs, no stopping on the road, no standing, parking, or stopping along the road. Because this is, of course, the place where the best Instagram selfies can be had, or the selfies taken and then posted on Instagram. And of course, everyone is absolutely totally avoiding and not obeying the signs. So you have the skateboarder on the left, you have the young lady for some reason sitting in the middle of the road doing a yoga pose. There's love on the bottom left, and there's families on the bottom right. And it's now a garden that, instead of having about 50,000 people visit every year, gets about 300,000 people every year. And of course, this is a real problem because it's dangerous. There's all sorts of liability issues, and people who do the Instagram selfies really need to smarten up and shape up and treat the garden with some risk. Oh geez, I didn't know I had that one in there. What a blow! Anyway, I put this one in just to show you. It's a fabulous pair of legs. It's not going to go on Instagram, but who could resist a selfie there? And so then we move on to the rest of the Pacific, and we're going to go to the Galapagos Islands of May of last year. You can see the Galapagos on the square red area to the left of the picture, and the man on the right, which of course is Charles Darwin, and his journey in the map above, leaving Plymouth and over a 5-year period going around the world. But to the left-hand side of the map, his stop in the Galapagos about halfway through, and its importance for botany. You do see Russell Crowe there. That is not me, that's Russell Crowe, and it's somewhat famous, this site, for a movie of the 2003 Master and Commander, and I'll refer back to that in a minute. But for now, Galapagos was most important for these beasts, the Galapagos finches, the 13 finches that have different evolutionary paths because of their need to evolve certain traits within the finches in order to eke out their ecological niche. And of course, Darwin writes this up as on origin of species, and of course the element of evolution. But it has remarkable bird life. You will all may know that, or guess, these are blue-footed boobies, but there are no prizes for knowing what those are. Those are their cousins, the red-footed boobies. The flightless cormorant in the Galapagos is to be found there. And in this case, the glorious frigate bird. This is the male attracting females with his very unique display. I went there actually because of course, Darwin looked at the islands as very much an ecological niche. And so I went in search of an orchid called Epidendrum sciatica, the so-called buttonhole orchid, to hike through, to go up into the upper ranges of, that's the island of San Cristobal in the Galapagos, into the cloud forest to find the orchid. And driving along the road, you come across these guys right in the middle of the road. You don't have to jump out of the van very quickly. They don't move very fast, but boy, they are big. And so you are seeing there the giant tortoises of the Galapagos Islands, and they're really quite they're not shy at all. They're really quite approachable, because presumably their major threat is alone is man, and that's stopped in terms of the killing. So the giant Galapagos tortoise and walking through these forests, trying to find, which we finally found, this species of orchid, the so-called buttonhole orchid. And it is, and the term here is endemic, which means this orchid is only found in the Galapagos Islands. It's native to Ecuador, but only found because of its location in the cloud forest within the Galapagos Islands. There have been some transplants back to the mainland, but it is an endemic species to these areas. Much like these iguanas, these marine iguanas that have the ability to go into seawater, and hence they can absorb salt. They will take the salt in and they extrude it through their skin. So really quite remarkable. When I taught world regional geography, this was one of my major questions. It was always on the exam, and you can win hopefully lots of drinks in bars by asking, are there any penguins on the equator? And the answer is yes. These are Galapagos penguins. They're on the equator, which is what the latitude of the Galapagos, and they're the only penguins, of course, on the equator. And they are there because of the cold Humboldt current that comes off the coast of South America, all the way up from Antarctica to the Galapagos Islands. So there are the Galapagos penguins. And there's me, that's me finally at the site of the ship, of the master and the commander. So if ever you see that on the weekend, you will have seen it. All right, let's get to gardens, you're saying. I came here for gardens. So there's the gardens. That's the most beautiful garden in the world. You can see it there. It's my garden in Wethersfield, Connecticut. And as you can see, my irises are just coming out. So I hope yours are coming out as well. I suspect yours are coming out more than mine because of your location on the coast. We're going to go to Australia and New Zealand first. The first place we're going to go to is the Arid Lands Botanic Garden in a place called Port Augusta, South Australia, about 6 hours north of Adelaide, into the Great Australian Desert. And much as it's a desert and it has all sorts of cactus and succulents and not of lush plants, there's certainly bloom, and those are sturt peas, those red plants, those red flowers. I wanted to show you this just because if you didn't believe me, this sign will convince you of what I say is true. It's in the Arid Lands Australian Garden. If you look at the sign more closely, it says the Friends of the Australian Arid Lands Garden have planted this or put this plaque up on the 200th anniversary of the death of Matthew Flinders in 1831. And you see the last two lines say by Dr. Richard Benfield. It's a world-leading authority on garden tourism. So if you don't believe me, go to Port Augusta, 6 hours north of Adelaide, and there it is. There's the proof. The plant behind was planted in my memory. It doesn't seem to be doing very well, does it? It may be indicative more of me than the biome in which it's located. This one I thought you might find of interest. It's from Hamilton, New Zealand. We're still in Australia and New Zealand, and it's the Hamilton Botanic Garden, about an hour and a half south of Auckland, the capital. In 2014, it was elected or voted the Garden of the Year by the International Garden Tourism Network. And Hamilton is rather unique. I can show you lots of pictures of Hamilton, but it's unique in that the director, Peter Sergel, has tried to put in the garden an example of every garden design around the world. So essentially what you're looking at here is the Italian garden with the ciabaga. You see those four waters coming into the central fountain, which is very characteristic of Islamic gardens. And they have all sorts of gardens, whether they be Mediterranean. This is the English garden here. You see the brick and the floral borders there. The International Garden of the Year sign for Hamilton Gardens posted above the gents' urinal. Anyway, now we're going to go to Southeast Asia. And if you go to Southeast Asia, invariably you will go through the airport in Singapore. It's the major hub for Southeast Asia. There's the runway in the back at Changi Airport. You can see the main terminal right in front of you, and to the left and right as terminals 2 and terminals 3. And of course, whenever you land in a hub, invariably you have to change terminals to go to your next destination. And if you go to Singapore, you walk through this. This is the airport in Changi, Singapore. They have made a garden, 3 acres of garden connecting all of the terminals, and you can walk through there. There's also transportation. You don't have to walk beneath glass, and so you have essentially a conservatory throughout the airport in Singapore. There's a lot of floral splendor, a lot of orchids are through there, going through the garden, and it's one of the nicest areas of transit in any airport in the world. But you say to me, Dr. Benfield, I always arrive at midnight whenever I arrive at a downed airport, and my flight leaves at 3 in the morning, and what good is that to me? Well, you can still see the garden at night. They do a beautiful job of lighting it up throughout the night, 24 hours, and I think you would agree it's one of the more spectacular, quote, gardens in the world. They also have another very specialized orchid area. Which brings us to a place called Gardens by the Bay. Gardens by the Bay is a reclaimed area. In 2012, the Singaporean government, in conjunction with some private enterprise, built this massive garden complex called Gardens by the Bay, which, as you can see there, are a series of, I think, 10 symbolic garden floral displays connected by a walkway. You can see the walkway between them. At the end of the garden, you can see a conservatory, that blue building in the left-hand side of the picture, where the walkway takes you through there as well. So you can see the walkway, the gardens, and this is the interior. And so it's landscaped very much like it's a cliff. The goal here was and is for the Singapore government. They want to be known as the garden capital of the world. And so with the airport, Gardens by the Bay, and as we'll see in the next shot, they really are trying very hard to do just that. Similarly to the airport, they do it late at night. They light up the structures, these vertical structures that have that if you will, arboreal design. So it is very, very nice, very spectacular, and it attracts very many people. And I think you would agree it would be a place that anyone would like to go to see and see through. Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. Singapore comes by its heritage for gardens quite genuinely. Singapore was actually the heart of orchid hybridization and orchid propagation throughout the world. There's a national orchid garden in Singapore, you can see there, and it's in the Singapore Botanic Garden. So this is the Singapore Botanic Garden. It's distinct from the Gardens by the Bay. Very, very pretty garden. Replete with all sorts of works of art and very lush foliage, because of course we're in the tropics here, and so Singapore is really rather nice place to take a vacation if you're the garden enthusiast like I. As I say, they're also the if you will, the heart of orchid hybridization and orchid propagation. And it's remarkable what they've been doing lately in the world of orchids. So I thought I'd digress a little bit and show you some orchids, which strangely are taking on the traits of humans. So we have the monkey-faced orchid. You see the Latin name Dracula simia. It's often called the Dracula orchid as well. Simia being monkey, of course, Latin for monkey. So the Dracula simia. And this one here is the darker variant of Dracula simia, hence the Dracula term. These come from Ecuador, the orchid garden in Ecuador. There they are when they actually look like flowers instead of the close-up, but it's remarkable their resemblance to simian primates. This is the moth orchid, Phalaenopsis. I think the most spooky of that is the one on the left. That has the most eerie resemblance to, I guess, some kind of moth or some kind of secretive moth. And this is the naked man orchid, Orchis italica. I don't know why they call it the naked man orchid. Maybe someone can help me at some point in the future, but that's what it looks like when it's actually a flower. You can see on the right, but it has been known and is known today as the naked man orchid. In order to be not sexist or biased in any way, this is hooker lips orchid, Psychotria elata, or if you prefer, you can have the dancing girls orchid. I will show you or note to you, look how it's part of the impatiens family there, Impatiens piquatia, though my impatiens certainly don't look like these. This is the laughing bumblebee orchid, which is I think one of the prettiest orchids, and of course this is the cutest, the swaddle babies orchid, Anguloa uniflora. This is the parrot flower orchid, again a member of the impatiens family, and the snapdragon seed pod, often called the skeleton orchid, but it is a seed pod of a snapdragon. And lastly, this flying duck orchid, that one comes from the Adelaide Hills in South Africa. I took that when I was in South Australia, SA, in Adelaide, when we went out looking for orchids in the area, just behind the mountains behind Adelaide. We're moving north and west to Thailand now. And we'll go to a place called Nong Nooch Garden. It's not a botanical garden, but you can see elements of a botanical garden with the bonsai, the large bonsai on the top left picture, but it has all sorts of goofy, the meerkats on the right, and it has some botanical merit. This is their cactus and succulent collection, which is arguably one of the best in the world. It's really quite remarkable for a tropical rainforest area of Thailand. It has Thai gardens as well, or gardens I think have elements of Thai architecture. You can see the arborvitae and how they're laid out in that geometric pattern underneath or behind the Buddhist temple. But it's also, which is one of the traits, it seems, of Asian gardens, part entertainment spectacle. So while the gardens hold a lot of attraction for me, you can also see performing elephant shows, top left, tigers on the bottom left. On the top right, you can actually be posed with a live tiger, and you can have elephant rides. And so in Thailand particularly, they're very keen on making gardens an entertainment spectacle, not just a place for plants and plant education. Moving across the Andaman Sea to India, I wanted to show you pictures here of the Deccan of India, the Central Plateau, the Caste Plateau, which we think is being fairly dry and barren, dusty and hot. But when the rains come, particularly the monsoon, as it comes early in the months of May and June and maybe July to the Caste Plateau, we see this wonderful explosion of native Indian wildflowers. And, oh, I'm sorry, I went a little bit just too fast there. So native Indian wildflowers, we'll show you a picture of that one closer up, just blanketing the hills and giving a spectacle that I think is really quite unmatched in that part of the world. Certainly not what you expect of India, hot, dry, dusty, and overcrowded. Which brings me to the sacrifice I gave for you, or I've taken for you to get to this presentation. I'll exemplify by a trip to what's called the Valley of Flowers in India. The Valley of Flowers in India is up in the Garhwal Himalaya, right at the end of that blue arrow. You can see the white map to the left. You can see a place called Haridwar. Those of you that are old enough, where I suspect most of you are not, would remember a group called the Beatles that used to go and see the Maharishi in Rishikesh. They did not carry on up the road to the beautiful town of Govingat. You can see Govingat there in the middle of the box. So at Govingat, you can go up there with some difficulty because the road's often washed out through earthquakes and mudslides and water slides. But if you make it to the map to the top right where it says Govingat, that's the end of the road. And there you take a 15-kilometer hike to the beautiful town of Gangriga. That 15 kilometers also ascends about 5,000 feet. So leaving about 9 o'clock in the morning, which I did, you climb up that, you can see the zigzag path going up the mountain slope there. Those are all pilgrims going to a shrine called the Helmkund Sahib, a Sikh holy site. So you travel up that pass, as I say, about 5,000 feet, lasting from about 9 a.m. to about 4:30 a.m. If you do not feel up to it, or you're not quite up to it, or you have to make the pilgrimage, you can get those young men on the left to carry you on a palanquin, and they will take a fee of $4, $4 for 4 of them for the day, so $1 each. Or they can pay someone $1 to carry your bag, or your wicker basket, which you can see on the right. Or if you're taking children to the shrine, they will also carry them. I did not do that. Here I am. I'm just going to go up through that pass to the in the background up at about 12 o'clock, just around that valley there. It's about 2 in the afternoon. I'm sweating like you know what. It's been a long, hard slog, but I arrived in the beautiful town of Gangriga. I had a beautiful suite, which is the view overlooking the valley from my balcony. You can see it there on the top left. And in Gangriga, I stayed in the Hotel Cuba. That's the hotel to the right. And they charge you $2 a night for the privilege of staying in the Hotel Cuba. It would have been $3, but my friend who's Indian, you can see her in the gateway there, got us in for $2 a night, but they didn't know I was there. And so they said we would have charged $3 if we'd have known he was there, but too bad, we'd already paid. But I'd have probably paid $3 because it was well worth it. This is the room. It says on there, the $2 is not for housekeeping sheets and towels because they're not provided. So there's the bathroom facilities on the left, and the bed that you see on the right, that duvet, has probably not been changed in the 3 months that the pass has been open. So you climb in where someone has been for the last, that's why it's $2 a night. But never mind, who cares? You can have a hot shower once you get there, because it's, as I say, it's been a long slug up that 5,000-foot pass. And you have this beautiful shower facility in the Hotel Cuba, and that's twistable. You can adjust it to the volume of cold, freezing water that comes out. But so what's not to like about the Hotel Cuba? Overnight, then next night you start heading up into the valley. You get rid of the pilgrims, they take another path, and you head up to that valley where the clouds still hang at early morning into the Valley of Flowers. And this is what the Valley of Flowers looks like just as you enter it. And if you hit it just right, the Valley of the Flowers, this is what you get to see. This is the Valley of Flowers. It's 9 miles long. It was discovered in 1931 by Major Frank Smythe, an Englishman that came over the top. He came over the other and walked into this fabulous Valley of Flowers. 9 miles of native wildflowers that only bloom for about 3 to 4 days a year, just when the monsoon rain comes, and then they die, and then they go for another day. But for the 3 days or 4 days that they are there, the valley is just a carpet of gorgeous wildflowers throughout the whole valley. So that's Valley of Flowers in the Garhwal Himalaya of India up by Nanga Parbat. I'm now going to take you to the Middle East and Oman, and particularly the town of Dubai. But before I do that, I want to take you back to Montreal in 2013 and a thing called mosaic culture. Mosaic culture, if I can describe this very simply, is 2 pieces of chicken wire with dirt in between. So it's a living, breathing organism. The plants will grow in it. You're actually growing things. It's not topiary where you're just cutting woody species. And so you may meld or mold these mosaic culture elements into shapes, and you develop these whatever you wish to develop within this thing called mosaic culture. On the left is the 8-story high tree of birds. There are 64 birds in there if you can count them. And the reason I showed you one with a cherry picker is because it's living and breathing. They have to water it every day or twice a day. And of course, the cherry picker broke down on the third day that the show was open. And Vincent, who's the director there, was madder than heck and said, get that thing out of here, but they couldn't. And yet it caused such crowds of people wanting to see them watering it. They then had to advertise the hours of watering, and that would be the highlight of the day for many people. They would pack people in for that. The bottom right are lemurs. They come courtesy of the government of Madagascar, though there was a major international incident where they were facing the other way before the show started. And Gilles, the director, asked the Madagascans to please turn them around. As you walk into the garden, you really don't want to see lemur rears. You'd rather see the lemurs themselves. So international incident averted. You walk through the garden and can see all sorts of mosaic culture, shapes and forms. This is a puffer fish here, and you can see, I think it's under the league, 20,000 leagues under the sea, another Jules Verne concept. But the highlight was this structure here. It's called Gaia, Mother Goddess of the Earth. It's about 60 feet high, and like all of the mosaic sculptures, it is a living, breathing structure. And so it is molded and tweaked every day. This was outside on the grass in front of it. That has to be cut for grass. You can have your dog, of course, was part of that, on the penguin on the bottom right, and I rather like the animal band to the top right, and their stick instruments. I don't know what this is. I think it's a gloomy bird. Anyway, back to the Gaia, Mother Goddess of the Earth. These horses had to be trimmed every 3 days. Their manes are natural grass, and as you saw at the start of the presentation, all this mosaic culture thing, 750,000 people, 750,000 people saw mosaic culture, one of which was this guy on the right. He's Sheikh Narayan Al Khalid. He's the ruler of Dubai. He went to mosaic culture, just loved it, asked me to go and see his garden. He picked me up, as you can see on the left, in his gold Bentley. It was one of 5 he had, so it wasn't short of transportation. And there you can see, he even took a copy of my book, Garden Tourism, and it's pained me ever since I met him in 2014 that he never paid me for the darn book. So I've given away free books to the richest man in the world. I can't believe I've done that. I'm so madder than heck. But he did pay my way to Dubai, first class on Emirates Airlines, to come to Dubai to see his garden, which is this one here. It's called the Miracle Garden in Dubai. And the reason it's a miracle garden is because those are petunias. I suspect many of you will be going out this long weekend and buying petunias. And you will take them home, you will put them in hanging baskets, and you will hope they will last till September and October. The Sultan's or the Sheikh's petunias last about 4 days before he has to replace them. Why? Because it is so hot in Dubai, the flowers die after 4 to 5 days. The marigolds last just a little bit longer. But he wanted to bring me to show me his copy of the mosaic culture, his Gaia, Mother Goddess of the Earth, and to ask me, as the quote so-called tourism expert, what did I think? And of course, I told him it was fabulous. I've never seen anything so beautiful. That way better than that darn thing in Montreal. You did much better job than they did there. So he was quite pleased with that. He's also renowned for all sorts of displays. So every year he puts in a different display. This is the national flower of Dubai at the entrance of the garden. But he followed the mosaic culture structure up with this, the world's largest Airbus 380 done in white petunias. And it won an award for the largest display, except you can see the petunias around it, the marigolds and all of those kind of things in the heart of Dubai. It gets about 750,000 visitors per year for the 6 months it's open. But the major expense is replanting the petunias every 4 days before they die. And even in those beds that you see in front of you, they have irrigation as well. Anyway, we're going to go to Africa. Phineas did not go to Africa, but we will, and we'll start in Marrakech, North Africa, in the country of Morocco. And again, we're talking desert. I think I seem to have an affinity for deserts. And there's the vendor of the water with his goat skin selling you water of a very dubious origin. But where we're heading for is that area on the right, which is the Jdaten Fana, which is the marketplace in Marrakech. And unlike most marketplaces, it's where you can go and see and be entertained by a snake charmer if you want to see some guy charming a cobra. Much more utilitarian. If you happen to have an accident, lose a tooth, you can get a tooth, and they will sell you a whole set of teeth. You can see all those lovely molars on the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, or a full set of false teeth. It's great. You can just go there and buy whatever you need. We went there, or I went there, to see this garden here. It's called Jardin Majorelle, and it's the garden of the cosmetic king Yves Saint Laurent. He spent his summers and winters probably in Marrakech and built his garden, the Jardin Majorelle. Jacques Majorelle was the designer and the architect of the garden, and it has this combination of modernist architecture, water, which is somewhat Islamic, as you can see there, and yet cacti, because we're in a very desert and very hot and arid climate. But the Jardin Majorelle is a remarkable garden in terms of its structure and its beauty, and there's something about all of those blue and red buildings I rather like. So the Jardin Majorelle. Okay, now I'm going to just try a great risk here, and hopefully without screwing everything up, I'm going to try and show you another nice part. So if we're ready now, we'll see this. Okay, so we're in Kirstenbosch National Botanic Garden, Cape Town, and arguably, I suspect, my favorite garden, which is this one here. It's Kirstenbosch National Botanic Garden. There we go. And what I wanted to show you here is this remarkable thing called Van Riebeeck's hedge. And the story starts in 1659, when this hedge, Van Riebeeck's hedge, they put a wild almond hedge around the settlement, because they were very wary of Africans coming in and potentially killing all the new settlers. So they put this hedge up there. The hedge was a wild almond tree called Brabeggium stellifolium, and remarkably, that hedge is still there today. There it is in front of it. It's called Van Riebeeck's hedge, and it's really quite a remarkable testament to just how long plants can survive and plants can be there. The garden, Kirstenbosch National Botanic Garden, as I say, arguably one of my favorites, is this one here. And in 2014, they put this remarkable structure through called a boomslang. Boomslang is Afrikaans for tree snake, and so you get the idea that it snakes through the upper story of the garden, of the tree part of the garden. But what's remarkable, I think, is that when they constructed this boomslang, they did not cut down one tree, one branch, or even take out one leaf. They kept it exactly the way it was, so they didn't infringe upon the nature of the garden. And so boomslang has been a major success for the garden. As you can see, Adam Harrower, the name on the left, is the director of horticulture, and he let me show you these slides that he took of this remarkable structure called boomslang. Okay, we're going to go up to Europe as we head quickly back across the Atlantic. Europe, of course, is a bit of a problem because there are about 3,500 gardens. And I really don't have time to go through them all. So I'm going to show you a little bit of snapping of some of the gardens here. This is Monet's garden in Giverny. Oops, that one was a slide I put in to show some of the problems they're having in gardens with the badgers overrunning the gardens because they're no longer treated as pests. And a normal streetscape in Europe, this one comes from Italy, becomes a forest of color when the locals vegetate or put flowers throughout their community. It's very wonderful the way they do this. This one's from southern Germany, just outside Augsburg, and there you can see a 3-story, or we'd call 4-story structure with cascading flowers all the way down the front of the building. Some rather nice wisteria, the glory of wisteria in a garden. This is Frankfurt Botanic Garden, and this from Andalusia in southern Spain, and there a wonderful explosion of color, probably bougainvillea, I believe that is. Of course, the Dutch go at it a different way, and they vegetate the tops of their buses. And so it's only a matter of time before, of course, we do that in Hartford. This one comes from Albania. This is Tirana, a very poor and arguably one of the most poverty-stricken countries of Europe, yet they have every year this floral carpet running the length of the main street in Tirana. You see the large numbers of people that turn out to see that. I'm going to take you across off the coast of Europe here to the Canary Islands. This is the island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. It again is somewhat arid, unlike the rest of the Canary Islands, which because of their location and because of the fact that they've never been glaciated, show us some of the most fascinating plants in the world. They've had something in the order of 3 to 5 million years to evolve. So places like Gran Canaria, you can see on the bottom there, become a hotspot, if you will, for biodiversity and endemic plants that are found nowhere else. I'm going to start in Lanzarote in the top area there. And the most famous part of Lanzarote is this garden here, the garden of Cesar Manrique, his cactus garden. There you can see Jardin de Cactus, the creation of Cesar Manrique. Those of you that knew the art community in the late 60s and early 70s, Manrique was one of the more famous modernist artists, but he devoted his last years in the 90s to building his garden on Lanzarote. This is Gran Canaria, just up there, about 8 kilometers out of the capital, Las Palmas, but the valley that it's in is the source or the hiding place or the repository or the last vestiges of some endemic plants of the Canary Islands, which, as I say, are found nowhere else on Earth. So it becomes a great laboratory for the nature of plants. I take you to my old homeland here in Great Britain. And literally, this is topical. I thought I'd put it in just for you folks tonight. It's the Garden of Bodnant in North Wales. And while it's a pretty, if you will, estate garden, you can see the beautiful floral borders on the right and the well manicured lawns and the layout there. It's most famous for this laburnum arch with these cascading yellow flowers coming down from an arch that's about 75 to 90 feet long. They bloom for about 10 days, so you have to be lucky to catch it at its peak. Or you have to know the gardener to get in there early, which I do. So I didn't take that picture with that lady in there. I took that later on. But Bodnant is a beautiful garden. It's one of the National Trust gardens, which are one of the more not famous, but one of the more responsible gardens or organizations for doing gardens in England. This is their rose garden, rather pretty display of roses in that area there. And as I say, what I like very much are these English herbaceous borders with this riot of color, which I find very, very pretty and very, very attractive. Which takes us down to southwest England. This is a place called Hestercombe, arguably one of the top 10 gardens in Britain. The house is designed by the architect, or was designed by the architect Sir Edward Lutyens, but most famous is the garden of the great garden designer Gertrude Jekyll, and she designed the garden at Hestercombe, and again, it's one of the more well visited, pretty, I think in many ways different, unique gardens of England, which brings us to central England. And this is a garden you will have great difficulty in seeing. So I thought I'd show you the garden. The house is somewhat subdued and unprepossessing. It's not a great house, not one of the great stately homes, but the garden's quite extensive. As you can see, it has a fairly wild section of meadow, both before and after. You can see the alliums and the bluebells, and the house itself is rather nice. There are elements of garden design in there, which I think you would find very pleasing. You can see the hedges that they put in, the sundial and the borders there, really quite nice. Some good displays of foxglove and the like, which give it an aura, as I say, of a rather pretty English country garden, but really very different and very unique. But as I say again, very difficult for the individual to see, for you to go and see this, in large part because the owner is, while he's a very public person, is also a very sheltered person. You've just seen the garden at Highgrove in Tetbury in the Cotswolds of His Royal Highness Prince Charles, and that's his garden that he takes great interest in. He's in there pretty much every day, working and designing it and tweaking it. And occasionally you can go in with groups. They'll let groups go in, and the prince will actually come out and talk to you and show you what's there. But I went in courtesy of the friend, the head gardener, who indeed is a friend of mine. We're going to go to the Chelsea Flower Show, that rather wonderful Chelsea Flower Show. But if you ever wish to go to the Chelsea Flower Show, be prepared for crowds. It's only open for 2 days a year for the general, or 2 days in the year for the general public. And so the 150,000 people that get there, this is about 75,000 a day that come there, crowd the place out, and you're very much pressed to see what you want to see, whether it be the quintessential English country garden from the Royal Horticultural Society, which they show very proudly as being quintessentially English, or this garden here. This is the Botswana Angolan garden. It won first prize, I suspect in large part because it was designed and commissioned by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. They wanted, he's very interested gardener, believe it or not, and he's very interested in Southern Africa, so he wanted a garden in the Royal Horticultural Show, in the Chelsea Flower Show, and as I say, it won first prize. What a big surprise there. Who would give Prince Harry second prize? I mean, you just can't do that. But there's all sorts of modernist gardens. This is where garden designers run riot with all sorts of mixtures of plants, alliums and irises and borders that you see on the right. Thought you'd be interested in the picture to the left. This is a garden where they're trying to display a driveway that your car would park in that area to the left, and you vegetate the interstices between the flags. And so there's no excuse not for having your garden driveway, or your driveway a garden, as opposed to just a piece of tarmac. When I went there in 2015, it was the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, and so the show was very much English country gardens, but they also exhibit some more eclectic stuff, and I thought I'd show you the art of stone balancing by the artist, if you will, Adrian Gray, where he balances stones, and they are not glued, they are not affixed in any way to each other. They are perfectly balanced on each other, which of course is why the rope is there and why my valet was not allowed in to test whether there was any glue under there or not. But it's really quite unique, the art of stone balancing in gardens. And if you think that's all, there's all sorts of designs that you can do and have for the art of stone balancing. He calls it gravity glue. So you can see gravity glue inspired somewhat by the Inukshuks of the Inuit of northern Canada, of that area north of Coppermine. This is a cooper's garden, a medieval cooper's garden. Cooper is a person who makes a barrel, so those are barrel staves. This is a modernistic garden, the Chelsea Flower Show. I like this because I thought I could do my doorway something like this. Any old iron rods you can put like this, but on the right you'll see cacti and succulents in the midst of water. This is a water garden, and this person has inlaid in there an arid land cactus garden, little cactus garden in the middle, which I thought was quite unique and quite different. But if you can't get one of the 158,000 tickets, you can go to the Chelsea Fringe, which is a flower show of fringe attraction. It's put together by a man called Tim Wilson in 2012. And he said, because the Chelsea Flower Show consumes so many people, we can't get there. We're going to make the whole of London a garden. And so they began to design and implement garden designs in the urban area. So you can see the edible garden stop there right in front of you, where the bus, you can eat from the garden while you're waiting for your bus. Some people have designs, I'm going to take this London taxi cab and do something rather neat with it. And if you have leftover beer cans, which I suspect some may have, there's a good use for them with the petunias. Such a fame that here you can see Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cornwall. That's Tim Richardson looking up at her, and he put a garden in one paving slab. Yes, that is the garden there. You can see the mini chair, you can see the household cavalry guarding it, and of course the British flag stretching between the trees. All sorts of community gardens take part in the Chelsea Fringe Festival. It's become very much a major tourist attraction. Even if you've just got time for a bit of sidewalk in the main street, you can take your old computer and your filing cabinets and make a garden out of that for the Fringe. This is in Shoreditch, London. It's pretty sad shape until the Chelsea Fringe took over it, and that's the garden after they refurbished it. So Chelsea Fringe Festival is doing a lot for furbishing landscapes. This is an old railway station abandoned, and now they're vegetating that. And of course, the town council have to water it. Old cars are always popular for fringe adherents. Anyone can do it. You're allowed to go and do whatever you want. It's not governed in any way. The year I was there, they'd gone with a theme for gnomes. So they put gnomes in trees. And of course, the children had to go and find the gnomes in the neighborhood they were in. So really getting children part of the garden community. So there are more gnomes there. In Dublin, I wanted to show you this one because it's an inspiration for all of us in places like Darien or Stamford or wherever you live. It's the home of a lady called Helen Dillon. She's called the Queen of Gardening. It's just south of Dublin. That's her house. That's her garden to the left and right, and that reflecting pool. There's Helen herself. And look at the explosion of plants and color and variety there. But the next slide will show you that the end of her garden is in the top left in the corner. That is about the same size as my garden here in Wethersfield. So it shows what you can do with a relatively limited garden space. You can make it an absolute spectacle, and you still have room, if you see on the right, for the greenhouse, for the glass house, to grow your plants and place them out. So don't be limited by the fact you've only got a little garden or you only got a little plot. This plot is 60 by 120, which I say is about the same size as my garden there. But the profusion and the explosion of color and the variety of plant life is really quite something. Right way up in the north of England is a place called Alnwick Castle. You can see the castle on the right. And the reason I put those people on those broomsticks is it was the home of Harry Potter. It's where Harry Potter was filmed, certainly where he played Quidditch. It's a classical garden. They have elements from the 1750s of Italian landscape Renaissance gardens, but it's of biggest fame, of course, for children for this thing, the poison garden, the only poison garden in the world. You cannot go in there without the guided tour. You cannot touch. You certainly cannot taste, and you cannot go anywhere near the plants. What plants? Well, you can see this plant here, Ricinus coronicis. This is the ricin, the plant from which you derive that awful poison ricin. So somewhat famous as that. I want to show you something which I find is quite remarkable. This is Kew, the Royal Botanical Garden at Kew in 2015. It's the main road leading up to the conservatories, and you can see some beds on the right, some chairs for folks like me that are weary, kind of a crummy paved driveway up there. So the director of horticulture, Richard Barley, asked his head of garden design, Rich Wilford, to design conceptually a garden based on Entata gigantus. And he put together a garden in which you could have all sorts of diversity, whether it be monocots, whether they be hybrids, cultivars, Laminiaceae, which is the mint family. You have diversity in the mint family. You can showcase the life cycle of plants, whether they be perennials, biennials, or annuals, seed, all of the kind of things which we love and like about gardening, and pollinators and all of those kind of things. So he takes this little tapestry. You remember that's what it looked like in 2015. And 1 year later, that is what it looks like. I think that's a remarkable change. It's the first major garden development that they've put in Kew in probably 75 years. And I think it's a major development. It's a major improvement on what was there. This garden will get even better because that was its first year, so it still has to fill in and grow, but it's certainly causing large numbers of people to come and see, to the extent that Kew used to attract about 1 million people every year, and now getting 1.8 million people come for what I call the wow factor. That and this structure they have there, which is the beehive, where you can go inside that structure and it simulates the noise within a beehive. You can hear all the bees buzzing. That's the conservatory in the back, and now they're overrun with foxes. They have a fox problem in Kew Garden. I was looking for an aircraft museum in Northern England one day. Cosford's an Air Force base. I took a wrong turn, or I didn't make the turn. I carried on down the road. I don't know why I did, but luckily I came across David Austin Rose's own garden. David Austin literally lived down the road, and he has a 3-acre rose garden that is pretty much in bloom all through the summer. So David Austin Rose Garden is something. Now we take you down to Haverford in Hampshire, and this old paper mill. Those buildings to the left are a paper mill. They formerly made paper notes for the British Empire. It closed in 1985, and it was taken over by the Bacardi company, who constructed these glass structures in which to grow botanicals, botanical specimens. A rather pretty structure, and I think it certainly integrates with the mill. So you can take a tour of the mill on the left, go through the botanical displays where it tells you all about distilling, and on the right it explains the botanicals, the lemon peel, and they lead you into this building where you have 17 various botanicals that you can sniff, you can touch, you can taste, you can feel. There's a tactile element to it. And they give you a piece of paper and they ask you to rate them. So you say, oh, that one, that lemon's a 7 out of 10. I like that. And you know what, when I don't like that juniper, it's only a 3 out of 10. And as you exit that room, they take you through the distillery in the back. You can see the distillery in the back. They take all of your possessions off you. You cannot take photographs. You can't take your cell phone in, any of that kind of thing. You're not allowed to tour the distillery with stuff in your hands. It's about a 45-minute tour, and as you exit, you come out of the distillery, and they say, "Oh, Miss Grady, Miss Sheary, here's your 3 botanicals that you rated most highly. We've made you a gin and tonic made of your 3 top botanicals." So you get a free gin and tonic with the top 3 botanicals you like. And they suggest you might even want to buy a bottle of Bombay Sapphire dry gin to go home. Now you obviously like freeze gin and tonics. Into the Atlantic, real quickly, into the Azores. A couple of years ago, I went to speak in the Azores. They also want to make their destination a garden destination. Very pretty island. And very, very scenic, I think you'd agree. That's an old volcano up in the northern part of the Azores, pardon me, not the Canaries, the Azores, and they're basing it on their display and their collection of camellias. So these are camellias. It's the only place where you can make, where you can find tea outside of India, made from which is the plant, the camellia, which is what tea comes from. In South America, this is Quito Botanic Garden, and I like this one in large part because you see on the right the help the Missouri Botanical Garden is doing to help the garden in Quito. There's certain elements when you travel of stuff you look at and you say, boy, I'm not too sure I want to be a utility guy in Quito, Ecuador. I wouldn't want to take a metal ladder up to those wires there's no double overtime policeman on there, just 2 cones, and no one knows what the heck he's doing. So you watch out when you go. Central America, and this is Cuba, the country of Cuba. Remarkable biodiversity there. That's the city of Havana. They do have a botanic garden, but what I wanted to show you was that picture on the top, on the right, which are bottle trunk palms. They are only found in the world in one 9-mile stretch of the country of Cuba. So if you want to see bottle palms, you have to go to Cuba to see them there. In the far north, about 5 hours out of Havana, is the Soroa River, the Soroa Valley, or the beautiful valley. You can see how lush it is with those crotons in the back and the orchids that they produce. I took my students there. Those are CCSU students showing a complete lack of interest in the garden, until they get to the cigar smoking area. And of course, they love to all have a free cigar. So what's not to like about free cigars? We're going to go to Canada next. We saw Montreal as Mosaic Culture. They kept some of the Mosaic Culture sculptures, so you can still see. There's our friend, the dog. That's a Japanese dog, actually, because it's outside their Japanese garden, which is a very beautiful Japanese garden, but I like it as much at night when they light up the structures in the garden. They have lanterns, floating lanterns on the tour, and it really does become a remarkable light spectacle nightly in Montreal Botanic Garden. As I say, they still keep some of the Mosaic Culture structures. So there's Viking with snake. I'm not too sure what the deal is. This one I know a little more about. It's the Indigenous Peoples Garden. These are Mohawk Indians, and it's part of their legend of how the Mohawks came to this country on this boat. You can see the boat and the god that brings them there. And it's dedicated to native people. I want to show you a little bit about the country of Ottawa, because in 1940, the Dutch royal family during the war fled to Canada. Queen Marguerite, the princess, was born in an Ottawa hospital. The hospital room was sold by the Canadian government to the government of the Netherlands. So technically, Queen Marguerite was born in the Netherlands. It's called extraterritorial possession. She was born in the Netherlands in the war years. They returned to the Netherlands in 1945, and in 1952, they sent 100,000 tulip bulbs to thank them for their hospitality. 53, they had a festival. They increased the number of bulbs, whereas in 2017, they had 3 million bulbs. This year it was closed, of course, because of coronavirus, but the years before it was packed with people. The Ottawa Tulip Festival, the Canadian Tulip Festival, they call it. And on the left here, I put this. This comes from the Netherlands, but I like the idea of white tulips. It's become a remarkable function. It closed today, but they have tulips in the color of the Canadian flag, the red and white of Canada, the Governor General statue, and the Parliament buildings in the background. They will provide tulip bulbs for people in their houses if they will plant them. So the houses in Ottawa become part of the festival. And those of you who are gardeners know tulips are best laid out as beds. And so there's an Ottawa Tulip Festival garden being laid out as beds. This is Edmonton. $25 million from the Aga Khan to put a Islamic garden in the middle of northern Alberta. So it was just finished, and it makes the cover of Public Garden this year. I got complaints once before when I did this. They said, you didn't show my favorite, the Bouchard Gardens. So I'm going to just show you a couple of pictures from Bouchard Gardens on the west coast of Canada, outside the city of Victoria. That's the Parliament buildings in Victoria, just off the beautiful west coast of British Columbia. And the floral display gardens of Bouchard Gardens started in 1910, completed in 1921. And it is a display garden. It's not a botanic garden. You will not find any plants labeled, but those of you that have been or wish to go there, it is arguably one of the most iconic gardens in the world. And it's certainly, this is outside the cafe, really one of the great gardens. Okay, let's finish off by getting us into the United States. And Anza Borrego Desert State Park. I showed you wildflowers in India. Well, let's have a look at them in the United States, because we don't take second place to anyone in the world. This is the Anza Borrego State Park outside San Diego, about 5 hours outside. The rains of the El Nino bring the first blooms in 17 years. It's a desert, it's an arid landscape, but all of the cacti and all of the succulents begin to flower because of the advent of water for the first time in long years after they've lain dormant. So really quite a spectacle as the desert blooms. And as I say, this was Anza Borrego. We also saw the same thing in other parts in even Death Valley, California. Up to the city of Buffalo. This is from the city of Buffalo. Buffalo, we all know, is depressed. It's post-industrial, all sorts of ruined buildings. Well, not so. It is now the garden capital of North America, they say, because on the last 2 weeks, the last 2 days of the weekend in July 25th, 26th, for example, 365 private gardens open, to which they bring about 80,000 people into Buffalo. All the gardens are free, transportation's free, the map they give you, the location is free, and you can wander around and look at all of these gardens and do what I call rubbernecking. People make great efforts. You can see on the left the garden of these people in the top in the foreground, and what it looks like after they open for Garden Walk Buffalo. You can see the same garden 3 years later as it really develops on the right. Jim Charlier, who was the past president of Garden Walk Buffalo and a friend of mine, I asked him to send me some photos. So he sent me a whole bunch of Garden Walk Buffalo photos. So there you go, up to Buffalo this year. Seattle, we have the artist Dale Chihuly. He's opened a new wonderful garden. Dale Chihuly is famous for his glass exhibitions. This is part of his indoor exhibition at his location. It's called Mille Fiori. It's 1,000 flowers, and he has exhibited that in a number of venues. And this one as well, the Ikeban and the Float boats, but he has now expanded into Seattle, his hometown. Actually, Tacoma is where he's from. Underneath the Seattle Tower, you can see the Seattle Tower, they've opened the Chihuly Garden. Now it's, I'm sorry, going a little bit fast for you there. It's really quite spectacular with all Chihuly glassware interspersed throughout the gardens. Little pricey, about $50 to get in, but I think now maybe you'll see it's well worth it, but it's certainly very different and very unique. And I think glassware, or particularly glass art, certainly does a lot of good for gardens. I'm going to finish off now with some new directions for US gardens, some weird and wonderful things we've got going in gardens around the United States. One of which, until coronavirus, was Barks and Brews, where botanic gardens would actually allow dogs into their garden and they would serve beer, so you could have craft beer. This has become a raging success. This comes from Norfolk Botanic Garden. Children love to bring their dogs. This is from Lewis Ginter Botanic Garden in Richmond, Virginia. These kids bring their dogs. Everyone has a nice time. And I think this is my best photo of all coming up. Isn't that just terrific? That is one terrific dog and one terrific young lady. So I think dogs and people going in there are really quite something. It certainly was a whole new development in gardens and what they do. There's a dog and beers being drunk, and Dick's Sporting Goods wanted to be part of that again in Norfolk. Meanwhile, at the Morton Arboretum in Chicago, kids are searching for hidden trolls. An arboretum, of course, is all about trees. A troll is a mythical, legendary figure from Scandinavia that is dedicated to stealing, eating, doing whatever with young children. It's a nasty little thing that hides under bridges and hides everywhere, ready to pounce on children. Well, apparently 10 trolls made their way to the Morton Arboretum in Chicago, and has been for the last 18 months. And so the kids have to look like this troll is looking for kids to look for the trolls. And of course, they're very cagey. They'll have little nets ready to capture the little kids if they don't be careful and be wary. Even in winter, he's still up to his nefarious business, this troll, and occasionally he gets lucky and the young child that was unsuspecting is consumed by the troll. This one, of course, is hiding behind the tree. This little lady, I think, has spotted him. And of course, if you park illegally, which is always a problem, the troll will get you there. So you have to beware of the rules for trolls in the Morton Arboretum parking lot. In San Francisco, they've placed 12 pianos hidden in the garden where anyone can play them. And you can have a sing-along around the piano. You can find people who can actually play the piano who come and play the piano. You can have people that will do jazz or play jazz, and you'll gather an audience. And there you see this jazz musician playing jazz. But even little kids can plunker and dunker and tinkle about on these pianos and have lots of fun. But I can't go during the day I work. Doesn't matter. They have concerts at night on those pianos with large numbers of people going around listening to the music, all for free. So gardens are doing a wonderful job there. And lastly, in Madison, Wisconsin, lessons in pollination and hybridization, which is always a tricky issue. So you want people to learn about pollination and hybridization. Not very gripping, but it is when you have drag queens doing the presentation. This is Miss Lucy and Miss Maud, and they are explaining pollination to the visitors for the afternoon. They will demonstrate how you pollinate, in this case, lilies, and then you can try it yourself. And so for a program that used to attract under 100 people, this last year they had 750 people and had to do reservations. Some ideas for you to try in your garden. This one comes from the Lost Garden of Heligan in Cornwall, both of them, and this young lady lying down on the job. If you have plastic bottles lying around doing nothing, there's a nice use for them. And there's the love nut, our friend, the love nut on the bottom left-hand corner, and more plastic bottles on the right. Old tires, paint them and plant them is what I say. So you can make a nice garden landscape out of old tires. And if you've got a set of old pants that you don't use, why don't you just plant them? Green walls are becoming increasingly popular, and to the right, rail lines. And even if your trees are dying, you can make a nice work of art. These pictures come from Brooklyn, New York, with their green bridge where the Botanic Garden is outreach into the community. And on the bottom right, they give prizes for the best streetscape, vegetated streetscape within 20 blocks of the Botanic Garden. That was one that I put in because I want to try that in my garden. I don't think I will try this one. I'm not too sure what it's talking about, but trees also become important. Why do we not paint trees? We paint everything else. I think they look rather nice. This is Cheekwood in Nashville, Tennessee. And so remarkably, we're right back home to the most wonderful garden in the world, 30 Belcher Road, Wethersfield, which is my garden. That is not a picture from this year. That's a picture from last year, but it really is my favorite garden when I get out there working in the garden. Here's a lesson for all you gardeners. This is where not to grow black-eyed Susans. Look at that. This is my driveway, which I haven't vegetated like they did at the Chelsea Flower Show, but for some reason, these lazy black-eyed Susans would started to grow in the middle of my driveway, and much to my next door neighbor's annoyance, to the right, you can see I had to move my truck onto his lawn in order to keep it there. So please don't plant your black-eyed Susans, your Rudbeckia, in the middle of the driveway, though there's an element of driveway that needs to be vegetated. I can't do the quiz because we'd have trouble playing it. Well, maybe we might not have trouble playing this one. Let's see if we got 2 seconds. Well, we might play. So did you get them all? That's what they were. Daffodils, heartsease and phlox, meadowsweet and lady smocks, gentians, lupins and tall hollyhocks, roses, foxgloves, snowdrops, and forget-me-nots in an English country garden. Okay, a few kind of pictures that I've gathered up as I've been around the world and people have sent me. On the left, that's a mosaic culture from Atlanta Botanic Garden. This one comes from Scandinavia, for example. That's a construct that someone put together, and this one comes from Thailand. This one I rather like, Composing the World on a Leaf, which I think is just the beginning and the end. So with that, that's the book on the left if you don't have it. That's the new one on the right, which you're bound to go out and get. And what you now know is what is required in a garden. You can go out and work on your garden. And what we have to do is look forward to next spring, when again we will see people saying, here comes Easter, let's go to it. But in the meantime, thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoyed Around the World in 80 Gardens. Whew.